Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NAGT webinar series. The NAGT webinar series is a one-stop shop for increasing our community's capacity in Earth education. Webinars in our series feature novel and innovative work such as Earth education research and pedagogy, new teaching materials, and the classroom and professional experiences of people just like you. The NAGT webinar series is free and open to the public. We often get questions if it's okay to invite your colleagues, please do so. You can use the chat as a place for discussion, questions, and comments. Additionally, if you want to, you can use the reactions tab to give cute little emoji reactions as feedback. And otherwise, in terms of interacting with each other, please remember that we follow the NAGT Code of Conduct, which I've put into the chat for your review. I can put it in for newcomers as well. Let's see here. So on my slide here, there's a link to the webinar series homepage where you can find the webinar schedule, an archive of past events, and information about our sponsored projects and programs. Additionally, if you ever miss a webinar, you can use the webinar archives to find slides, resources, and recordings of every webinar. So today's webinar is titled Teaching with Investigation and Design, an opportunity to transform your introductory undergraduate science classroom, and it's led by Ann Egger, Natalie Burston, and Angela Danishmund. Thank you all for participating today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to our speakers now.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Let me get my slides up here. And you are seeing the correct one. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is really a webinar leading into the Earth Educators Rendezvous. And I saw that some of you in your registration expressed interest in how that will do so. So I look forward to informing you more about that. So no fooling, this is what we're talking about today. So a few introductions. The three of us that Monica just mentioned and why we're here. So I'm Ann Egger. I'm a professor at Central Washington University. I have a joint appointment in geological sciences and science and mathematics education. And that means that one of my roles is teaching and working with our pre-service teachers. And a lot of the classes that I teach are directly for future teachers, both in sort of methods and research, but also I teach a course for a content course or science content course for elementary educators and middle level educators. And teaching that course, developing that course has really inspired me to do this project and to do that we can do a whole lot more and a whole lot better with our future teachers to have a transformative effect into our education system. I'm also the executive director of the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, so you might have seen me in that capacity as well. But today I'm mostly focused on my role as a professor. Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Burston. I'm a lecturer at the University of Montana. I teach primarily geoscience courses, like introductory earth science courses, but one of the courses I do also teach is for future elementary teachers. It is a giant 5-credit course that's physics and geoscience, and the existence of that class and the population of that particular cohort of students is my major tie into this project and why I really want to be part of it and the curriculum design.
And Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Danishmand. I teach at a 2-year college in Southern California. I am an associate professor and department chair, Department of One. So that means that I really teach all of the things that we offer. But one of my favorite courses now to teach is our Earth Science for Educators course, which is for pre-service teachers, typically K through 8, teachers that come in. It's usually the course that they put off to the end because they're a little scared of science. And so one of my main goals is to kind of break them of that fear and that thought and to show them that science is actually really fun and that anyone can do science.
Awesome. So we'd like to learn a bit more about who's in this room today. So we've got a few poll questions. So just please, there they are. Okay, so take a minute to look at and answer those questions, just so we know a little bit more about who's in the room. All right, we'll give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, let's see. Are you guys seeing the results? Do I need to do something?
I think it should share them.
It should be, okay, great. So great. It looks like we have mostly people who are teaching an introductory earth science or physical science course. Mostly enrollment less than or equal to 24, but a few bigger classes there as well. And mostly, let's see, mostly less than 20% have a major in education or plan to be a teacher at any level. But a few people who don't know, and a few people with much larger proportions. So that's pretty similar to what we had in our materials developers as we started this project as well. So it's great to see that we're that's reflected in this group as well. So let's see. I need to get out of that. Sorry. Let me tell you a little bit about what is TIDE. So that funny acronym stands for Teaching with Investigation and Design in Science. Our vision is that future teachers will learn science as undergraduates the way they are expected to teach science in the K-12 classroom. And this might seem like a really radical notion, but as you are probably aware from a lot of the recent research, that a lot of what's still happening in undergraduate STEM is lecture-based and not very interactive, especially at the introductory level, whereas these courses are really critical science content and methods courses for the teachers that are going into the K-12 classrooms. And that's not what we're expecting them to do in those classrooms. So we have two goals, and one is to engage and support faculty in developing, testing, and implementing new high-quality instructional materials that put science investigation and engineering design at the center of our introductory science courses. And then the second goal is to assess the impact of the use of the materials and the development process. You can learn more about the project at the project website, but today and the workshop this summer, we're really focused on this first goal about developing, testing, and implementing these new instructional materials. Those are based on 4 guiding principles for the project. And our guiding principles are that students will engage in scientific investigation and engineering design to deepen their understanding of core ideas. For those of you who are familiar with the next generation science standards, this will sound familiar to you. It uses a lot of the language of the NGSS. Faculty and the curricular materials they use will cultivate a learning environment where all students have equal access to learning and feel valued and supported in their learning. So we're really focused on equitable learning. Students will engage in addressing questions and solving problems that are relevant to their lives. So we know that relevance is a strong motivator to engaging in learning. So that's an important one of our guiding principles. And finally, students will engage in authentic and meaningful scenarios that make use of real data and models and reflect the actual practice of science and engineering. So these guiding principles are overlapping, they interact, and they really underpin all of the work that we're doing in this project, including the materials that we're developing. So how do we do that? How do we put those guiding principles in action in the classroom? This is mainly through, as I already mentioned, the rigorous development and testing of new materials. So what's shown on the right here is just a portion of the rubric that we use to both guide the development of the new curricular materials and then score them to externally to assure that they are meeting those the standards that we have set as part of this project. So like I said, this is about a third of the entire rubric, and you can find more about that on the website as well, and the link is down at the bottom. So the next step after the development, of course, development teaching by people like Natalie and Angela, is to promote their use beyond to the developers. And that's where we are now. We've spent a few years developing and testing these materials, and we're ready to share them beyond the development team. So I mentioned that they're not just implemented, but tested. The impact is tested, and we have some early results from what that testing tells us. And one of the things that we're looking for is not just more content knowledge. That's actually probably the less important component of this than really confidence in their ability to do science. So we do see those gains regardless of the discipline of the class that they're in. We see that students and instructors are engaged in more productive discourse or discussion about the work that they're doing. When looking at the instructors themselves, we see that their practices in the classroom have become more aligned with their beliefs about what should be going on in the classroom, and that both instructors and students are more satisfied. They enjoy the classroom and the teaching more. So you can find out more about that on our website as well. But I wanted to just show one tiny little snapshot of how we see that change. And on the right is a graph, kind of complicated graph, but all you need to look at is the fact that the gray dashed area is scores from pre-implementation, these instructors before they were teaching with the TIDES materials, and the yellow is after. And you see an increase in instructor guiding and a decrease in their presenting, and an increase in students working and a decrease in them just receiving or passively listening. So this is the kind of change that we wanted to see, and this is only kind of halfway through the development of these materials. So we expect to see even greater differences the second time around. So our goal today, our main goal, is really to whet your appetite for TIDES and for getting more deeply engaged in the project by potentially participating in our workshop this summer, or further dissemination when we get beyond that. So the way we're going to go about that today is I'm going to let Natalie go next and talk a little bit about her experience and thinking about these cycles of investigation and design that the materials are designed around. Then you'll hear more from Angela and her experience and thinking about what a particular class looks like. So from both of them, you'll hear how they've changed from what they were doing to what they're doing now and what results they've seen. And then at the end, we'll come back to just a tiny bit more about the workshop this summer and the application for stipends to participate in that workshop. So we also will have time for questions, but feel free to put things in the chat as we go. And Natalie, that was an abrupt transition to you. Take it away.
This is me. It's been a week since I've seen these slides, so I will probably be guessing at the what's next.
Okay.
Can you click next to see if there's, okay, yes. So let's put all of them on, sorry. So this shows the cycles of investigation in the course that I was teaching in the fall, and I will be teaching again this coming fall. The example I'm going to use is from cycle 3, but before I move to that, I'll explain what you're looking at. The way we set up our physical science, physics, and geoscience curriculum was with these 4 sort of cycles. So the first one is a little mini one, just to design to last a week, which is to introduce the concept of what is science and what makes a scientist, and get to know the cohort of students, both them getting to know each other and the instructor to get to know them. And then after that unit is done, we move into the 3 major units of the course, which are all content themed. And you can see those here on the slide. So the first real content cycle, or cycle 2, relates to the motivating question of how can a volcanic eruption shake the world? It's about the Hunga Tonga eruption of January 22. The next is cycle 3, the one I'll walk us through. How can observing patterns in Earth's structure help us understand its processes? So for this one, instead of using a world event as the anchoring phenomenon here, I used next generation science standards concept, which is patterns and structure and function. And then the third unit, the final unit, and cycle 4 in our course, answers the question, how do forces work in nature and machines? And the pattern throughout these four is listed below, going from strongly scaffolded with personal relevance through removing more and more scaffolding throughout the course, that by the end, in the final cycle, the students are really driving the engineering design with their own curiosity questions and motivation, but also now hopefully anchoring their personal curiosity into the unit specifically. So let's look at cycle 3, which is unit 3, which is really about density and buoyancy. So in my previous iteration of this course before tides, it was more of a topical concept, and it wasn't really focused on density and buoyancy. It was simply focused on ocean layers and ocean circulation, for example. So even in the physics and geoscience course, I would then break out these sections on physics and sections on earth science. And a unit on the ocean would have taken probably a week, would have included explaining the structure of the ocean, how ocean circulation works, like the giant ocean conveyor belt, explaining El Nino and La Nina events and their relevance and patterns in nature. And then in a lab setting, students would do a model, which is pictured here, where it's simply got hot, fresh water above. This is actually a video, which we can play. It's like a couple seconds. And you'll be able to see the cold, salty water upwelling as the wind, hairdryer wind, is blowing across the surface.
Yeah. Theirs is so good.
Audio is still in there. And
There's-
so the students would use this model to investigate how upwelling works, which is a challenging concept to understand. It would be explained in class with a figure like the one you see here, and then they would get to do it themselves so that they could really lock it in and get that it does actually move upwards. And that's,
Sorry.
you know, very, very singular. It's a section. It is tied to other things, but not deliberately. So let's look at how this goes in the tides version, if you can get there.
I can, I'm sorry.
Sweet. Okay, so I think there's, yes, okay. I don't know. I'm really bad at animations, and my apologies. I just don't know what happens here. They're in the wrong order. So the new version, the tides version, so now we're looking at density and buoyancy over the span of a month instead of just ocean circulation. And here, with reminding you that there's now some scaffolding removed, there is still curiosity and scientific relevance being provided, and students are using patterns in nature to across different systems, including earth layers. So this would start with them investigating how to make an observation about something that they can't actually see. And I use the simple tool of syringes for that. So we know that air is something, but you can't see air. Well, if you can see air, it's not a good sign. And they need to start to think about how can we observe this thing that we can't see, and then be able to provide evidence for its existence and how it functions. So what they're doing is developing their explanations for their observations, which is hypothesizing. And then we use this starting point to apply to other systems, which means that if they can make an interpretation about air, this thing they can't see, and how it relates to pressure, density, buoyancy, they should be able to use that concept to link to the next section when we talk about ocean layers. Perfect. So in this second section on ocean layers, which is what ties most closely to the previous iteration, the students go into ocean layers thinking about what they understand about the air and the atmosphere. And then they use real world data. They use the Argo buoy data. And this is a figure from the Argo system that shows how the floats work, that they're deployed and then they drift around and they sink at different depths and drift for some little longer time, and then they bounce back up. And as they do that, they collect data in real time. Temperature data, salinity data, sometimes dissolved oxygen. And so the students can access these data. They choose which floats they want to look at in which parts of the ocean. They're given scaffolding that they have to examine from poles to equator and in between, depending on how much time they have, and use those sets of real data that change every semester to draw their own cross-section through the ocean and see the ocean layers that they've predicted should exist. And then they can use that in their final version where they're now designing their own model. So in the previous iteration, I'm giving the students hot, fresh water and cold, salty water. And in fact, in the lab section, the TAs, one of my former TAs, went so far as to pre-mix the salty water and the hot water so that the students weren't even adding their own salt because they were so terrible at making decisions. In this new version, the students get to choose materials. So in these pictures, you see some funny textured fluids, and that's because some of them have decided to make their models using things like glycerin and oil and pancake syrup and dish soap and other stuff because they're curious about other things. So they are modeling how these different fluids are layered based on their density properties. And they're also modeling how things change as processes are going on, which looks at buoyancy. But for example, in the soap, students wanted to know how, and this is post-experiment, wanted to know about how does washing a bunch of birds in oil with dish soap in the ocean change processes in the ocean surface? And they got to play with that. Is the bottom one a video, Anne?
It is.
Okay. So
I
this
play?
one, yeah, please do. So this video, the students this is where we can see buoyancy at work, and they are adding something that is less dense than the glycerin in the bottom, and watching it upwell in a different way. I cannot remember what that experiment was, but the point I'm trying to show here is that they were doing the upwelling experiment with wind, but they were also adding their own self-driven experimentation so that they could see how different things came to play in their models. And they got to tour around and see what everyone else was modeling and see a wide array of different examples. And then from this point, we go to the next slide, maybe. And here they're applying their thoughts to the real world. So one of the things that came up in the news while I was teaching was this saltwater wedge in the Mississippi, and how I think there's some more images, Anne. Yeah, okay, great. Sorry again, animations. So this is from the news and from the articles from the Army Corps of Engineers, and this was coming up that they were people of this area of New Orleans and environs were wanting there to be piped in fresh water because the saltwater intrusion was going on as the saltwater wedge was moving up the Mississippi and encroaching on their freshwater aquifer. This is not something I would normally talk about in a class for future teachers, that is physics and geoscience, but they had all of the tools available and it was going on in the news, and they could understand how this saltwater barrier this built structure in the bottom of the Mississippi River actually works to prevent the saltwater wedge from moving upstream because there is a density difference. And they could also understand how, as groundwater is being lowered, that the salt water is overtopping this sill and now becoming a problem as it gets pumped in. So they were able to critically think about, discuss, and ask questions that I can't answer, like why are they still pumping? Why are people living here? Why did they build this barrier instead of changing practices? They were able to ask these questions and be curious about this real world event in a way that was really holistic and applied based on this month-long approach to looking at density and buoyancy, physics behaviors driving Earth system functions. I think that was my last slide. No, it's not. My takeaways. My takeaways from my teaching with this material and my development of this material is that this really allowed me to emphasize the practice of science. And I've always wanted to emphasize the practice of science, but being on the back end of curriculum design was really a major emphasis point on our end for the physical science and geoscience materials. And a lot of that is observe and measure and graph and interpret and hypothesize and experiment and model, all of which you saw in my slides. But a big part that we don't tend to emphasize in the traditional classroom is failure. And failure is how we learn as scientists, yet it often doesn't get published and it's often glossed over in teaching. But in my classroom, failure was a critical part of the TIDES curriculum. It was a safe place to fail. And we, on day one, introduced the growth mindset that learning from revision is how we learn. If you already know it, then you have nothing to learn. So I rewarded them for revising or planning a revision. And there was often times where students were asking, what if we tried this? And are we going to have time to keep working on revisions? And of course, the answer is no, we need to move on to the next thing, but it's awesome that you're thinking about it and you want to. And I added a quote here, which I'll just read. When building, creating, as well as calculating, I experienced outcomes that did not make sense and that I had to go back and redo as well as reevaluate, which allowed me to grow from my own mistakes and having a growth mindset. I believe that NGSS helped to facilitate teaching science with a growth mindset because you were focused on the skills you were practicing versus trying to get a specific answer. And this is a direct quote from a student from my course evaluation. Which is super awesome because that's literally the goal in teaching this cohort of students. So I think that's my last slide.
It is. Thank you, Natalie. We thought we'd ask a few more questions about your current teaching in a poll, also to see, kind of prompt you to think about how you might be challenged or benefit from some changes that you make. So go ahead and put up the second set of poll questions. And these are about the format of your class and the typical delivery mode. So just 2 questions here. Take a minute to read and answer those. Take a few more seconds. If you answered other, go ahead and throw in the chat what your format or delivery mode is. All right, so we've got lots of lecture plus lab, both taught by the same person, or integrated lecture and lab, mostly in-person only, some hybrid, no online only today, and no lecture plus lab with the labs taught by someone else today. Okay, lecture plus lab, but lecture is interactive. Awesome. So I think this largely reflects what we had in the development team as we launched into this project, although we did have one person who was teaching online only, and we did have a few people who the labs were taught by someone else. Okay. Let's turn it over to Angela.
All right. So before taking on TIDES, I was teaching this class for about 3 weeks for the very first time. And it was really a Frankenstein of things that I've done in my geology class, things that people have passed down to me, and then, things that I've scoured online for as well to try to make it interactive. We were in person at the time. 3 weeks into teaching the class for the first time, the whole COVID thing happened. We had to shift on Zoom. So this was the first semester that I was the department chair as well. So I just had a lot of stresses on me, and I just fell back to what I knew, right? So on Zoom, I lectured. I put them in breakout rooms occasionally, had them, research different topics and then come back and present to the class. I relied heavily on the lab manual from Pearson because there was a lot of online resources that were already there. So it was a lot easier for me to have that implemented. The course was focused mostly on geology. That's my background. And so there was maybe 1 or 2 days of the other sciences, but it was mostly geology. And it was not it wasn't a big, nice flow. It was very choppy, like, okay, today we're talking about this, next day this, next day this. There's no continuity to it at all. When I had asked the person that came before me, like, okay, well, how is this different from a regular earth science class? How is this teacher focused? They really didn't have anything different that they did. So that was automatically in my mind something that I wanted to change. I wanted it to make it more fluid. I wanted it to be scaffolded because I knew that teachers coming into the course were going to be afraid of science. And so I needed it like nicely scaffolded to make them more comfortable and just more geared towards teachers. And so when I saw the ad for the Tides project, I was like, I'm in, this is exactly what I want to do. And so I'm really glad that, you know, I was chosen for this. You can go to the next slide.
Oh, coming, there we go.
Okay, so Tides is a lot different than what I was doing beforehand. So there are topics in geology, astronomy, meteorology, and oceanography. They're all focused on the process of science, so how we actually do science and getting students comfortable with doing science. Each of the topics is driven by a motivating question. So are we moving towards forming another supercontinent? How can our campus be more prepared for severe weather? Are there resources on other planets that we can access? Should we access them, right? These are maybe things that students might have wondered at one time. And so because of that, they are engaged in the content. All of the units have various skills that they build. So just collecting data, making observations, like a lot of what Natalie said as well, how to use spreadsheets, Google Sheets, how to use them to graph online instead of by hand, just teamwork, how to communicate information and data, right? How we communicate our science is really important, especially when we're teaching to others, and also how to evaluate other engineering designs. So we have recurring themes and concepts throughout all of these units. We use the science and engineering practices web model to show that one, science is not a linear process. It can, you know, jump around different points and do different practices. It just depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to find out. We have scientist spotlights that are embedded as well with differing scientists, differing backgrounds, experiences, expertises. And then all of our assignments use the TILT model and template, so transparency in learning and teaching. Transparency helps build student skills, confidence, and also sense of belonging. So they know why they're doing an assignment. They can focus on those skills that they're going to be learning, and they have a clear criteria of what is expected of them so that they can self-evaluate while working. And we felt that this template was critical to implement in our units because it creates a more welcoming environment where students know what's expected of them. So also in the Tides approach, students use real data from online data banks. So a lot of our different units focus on using some sort of online database. So for severe weather, students will look at either wildfire, tornadoes, floods. These are the ones that I have up here, but there are other ones that we use as well. For plate motions, they use the GPS velocity viewer and plate motion calculator, right, to try to gauge how far things are moving and how quickly. And then for Earth resources, we use the USGS. There's a few of them from USGS. This one on the right-hand side here is the Mineral Resources Data System. So they feel comfortable going onto these databases and figuring out how to get the data that they need to help answer the questions or the tasks that they are going to be performing or answering. So to do these tasks, students work in teams. So they work in teams to make predictions, right? Where will the continents be in the future? They're going to go back and use those online data banks, find out how fast plates are moving, find out which direction those plates are moving, and then they estimate on different maps. So this one's just the 50 million years in the future map, but they make 3 maps, 50 million, 100 million, 150 million, just to kind of see. And all the maps are going to end up different, right? Just like paleo maps are different based on interpretation. So the students are going to be interpreting things a little bit differently as well. They complete tasks, create new societies with particular set of constraints. So they have to figure out, what resources will they need? Where are those resources? And how will we obtain resources that are outside of our societal borders? And then they also explore a new planet. So they have to figure out, okay, what do we want to know about this planet? What do we already know about this planet? And are there potential resources on this planet? And if so, how are we going to get them? So they create mission objectives, design a rover, and then their presentation, they pitch it to NSF to get the project funded, which NSF is just, the class. They all vote on who gets funded and who is funded with revisions. And then lastly, they evaluate previous engineering designs, so past rover missions.
Sorry.
And other, that's okay. You can go to the next slide. So
Okay.
past rover missions and other types of engineering designs for severe weather. And one of my favorite things is that students actually envision themselves as scientists. So as I stated before, throughout the units, they look at different scientist spotlights. And for the culminating unit, Unit 6, they actually create a scientist spotlight of their own and envision themselves as a scientist. And so this is 2 of my students from last semester. They used Canva to answer questions such as how long have you been at your college? What aspect of science are you most passionate about? What was your assigned job for the project? And expand on what you're hoping to get out of the mission project if you're funded. As well as other passions outside of class. So they've already had a few examples, and then they get to create their own, and they actually use it during their NSF pitch presentation. So students also reflect on what they've learned and connect it back to the process of science. So I mentioned before the science and engineering practices model, and so that's the web diagram that you see on the right-hand side. Each of those science and engineering practices listed around there. And you can see that you can take multiple pathways. It just depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. So at the end of each unit, students fill out this chart describing each step of that previous unit, and they relate it to the science and engineering practices that they used. They also answer a few questions like which science and engineering practice are you most confident in, least confident in, and which one do you use in your everyday life? So really getting them to think about what they've just accomplished and how they are practicing science as they continue throughout the course. And lastly, so at the end of every semester, I have kind of an end of semester survey that they get to take for a few bonus points. And one of the questions that I have here is just if a friend asked you about this class, how would you describe it? And so here are some of the answers that I've gotten. So the class models what elementary science should be more like, as it has an emphasis on discovery, exploration, and the idea that everyone can be a scientist. It applied to the real world. Overall great for someone looking to teach science/multiple subjects. A fun interactive class where you will learn to work in groups and have plenty of practice with presentations. It's a good way to get used to speaking in front of others, and the style of class makes learning science fun. And then also you get to work on many group projects that you can enjoy learning from, as well as working on your communication skills with others in the class to work together. So overall, it's really nice to know that students are getting a lot out of the course, enjoying it, and actually enjoying doing science and not really being scared to do it. From my own perspective, these modules are really everything that I would want for my Earth Science for Educators course. It's student-focused, very interactive, builds the student confidence in their own ability to actually do science. And having students reflect back on what they've learned really gives me insight on how they are learning and what key points are really sticking with them throughout the whole process. One of the things that I really like is that I'm learning right alongside them, because every group wants to focus on something a little bit slightly different. So I learn something a little bit different about, different weather phenomenon or different planets that I didn't before. And so I'm also learning and growing, which I love. And it keeps me interested, and I don't regret, or not regret, but I actually enjoy every day instead of when I was on Zoom, when I was like dreading every class. So that's it.
Awesome. So thank you, Angela. And I want to, I think it's great that both you and Natalie mentioned being asked questions you didn't know how to answer, or you didn't have the answer to. I shouldn't say you didn't know how to answer, but you didn't have the answer to them. And I think that's great. Like that's what we all aspire to, is have our students asking those kinds of probing questions that we all have to think about and we don't immediately know the answer to. So to me, that's a huge outcome of this style. So before we go to learn a little bit more about you and open up to more questions from you, I want to say again that this is to whet your appetite. We're deliberately not going through every unit of the material that we have, because we wanted to make this available to you, or make you aware of the workshop that we're leading in the summer. So the three of us will be leading a 3-day workshop at the Earth Educators Rendezvous this summer in Philadelphia. The 3-day workshops are in the mornings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then in the afternoons, there's other professional development opportunities you can engage in, or maybe you have a working group you'd like to work with. There's round tables, there are mini workshops, all kinds of things going on. The early bird registration deadline is May 1st, but we also have stipends available for this class, travel stipends available for this class, for this workshop. And that deadline is a little bit sooner. So our goal in having this webinar now is to give you enough time to both think about coming to the workshop, but also apply for that stipend of $500 that's available for people who can help promote the use of our workshop materials, of our curricular materials. I'm getting all of my classes and my workshops all messed up here. So I'll put this up again in a moment, and Monica's putting links to the program in the chat, and we'll have links to that stipend application as well. But first, we want to ask a few more questions. So if you are familiar with, I just learned about this word a few weeks ago, the waterfall question in Zoom. So I'm going to put a question up here, and the way it becomes a waterfall is that you type your answer in the chat, but don't hit return until I say to do so. So then we get all of the answers coming in at once. So we have a couple of these waterfall questions for you. So what is one thing you are excited about related to trying strategies for engaging students in investigations? And you can think about some of what you heard from Natalie and Angela, or things that you're already thinking about trying. But what's one thing you are excited about? So type your answer in the chat, but don't hit return. And in a minute, I will tell you to hit the button. All right, go ahead and hit return. Let's see what we got. Open investigations, getting them more engaged no matter their major. Yes, getting my students to think of themselves as scientists. Love that I'm a scientist infographic on Canva. I agree. Engaging students with local phenomena and issues and investigations. What can be learned from what's at hand? Seeing students get excited about their own work. Yes, more hands-on and dynamic. We've used inquiry-based labs for education students and other courses. I like the idea of introducing real data. Scientist spotlights. Awesome. Yes, all of the above. Okay, here's the next one, which is, what is a challenge you see in trying some of these strategies for engaging students in investigations? So again, take a minute to type something, and then I'll let you know when to hit return. All right. Hit return. Woo, look at all that. Okay. Challenge making the activities as relevant as possible. Some students don't participate in anything, not even think, pair, share. Yes. Finding the archival data for a sequence can be a challenge. Having 80+ students and only a lecture hall to teach in. Limited class time in the hybrid format. Group work is difficult. They often have a family or work time or are working. Maintaining student focus and engagement. Sometimes students are intimidated by failure. I like that. Failure as a concept can be good. Time. Need to cover a certain amount of material for articulation and transfer. The time to revamp the course. So the time, we do hope to give you some time this summer and support you in revamping the course. And I hope that you'll consider that. I think some of our materials developers have struggled with Mike's comment there about needing to cover a certain amount of material for articulation and transfer. And there's a systemic issue here that, or some systemic issues that need to be addressed in that case. And some of our materials developers had some strategies for that. So we can collect some of that for use as well. I think what I'll do now is, sorry. Some of those challenges bring up questions, but we'll just open to questions as well. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so we can be a little bit more conversational. And I'll open to anyone to ask a question, or to Angela and Natalie if you want to address any of those challenges that came up as well.
I do. I want to address the having time to revamp a course. I did the Integrate 3-day workshop at EER. I don't know when that was, 2017. The suggestion by workshop leader, whose name is I'm spacing right now, doesn't matter, was to only to revamp one thing. But I took those 3 days and I revamped the entire 101 class. So spent my time at EER, cracked it open, burned everything that existed before, and redid it all. And it was Dave McConnell. Thanks, Monica. And it was totally worth it. It was a hard 3 days, but it was also super easy because I went in there, I had the materials, I had the resources, and I left with an entire new course.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think that part of our goal here is of course, not everyone can make it to Philadelphia, but we also want to build a community that's interested in this. And this is something that we can support each other in the process as well. So when those 3 days are over, or when you feel like I just don't have time to do this, you've got some support for helping you through it. I'll mention something about relevance, because one of the things we talked about a lot as a development team is different kinds of relevance, and not everything needs to be personally relevant to every student to be interesting or motivating to them. So we talked about that sort of, again, using a scaffolding process where maybe the first unit or the first activity really is about personal relevance, but you can build to that into societal relevance. You can build to scientific relevance. What are questions that scientists are really still grappling with right now and that we can provide answers to? So thinking about it is impossible to make everything personally relevant to every student, but having those different ways of making it relevant, I think both Natalie and Angela would say that that's worked within their classes. I mean, does someone personally care whether there's a supercontinent forming? Probably not, but it's scientifically quite interesting, right? And it's something we do think about. Other questions or challenges you would like to address, Angela or Natalie?
I'm going to jump in on a couple others that I saw in the chat that are relevant. Having 80+ students, this seems like a lot of grading. Yeah, it does seem like a lot of grading. So I used ungrading and I used the reflections. I didn't mention anywhere near the details that Angela did, but my ungrading approach with the reflections from the students for each unit, reading them took time, but I only gave feedback when a student requested feedback. The rest of the time, they got a point for doing it. So it was literally, I could just enter the number 1 for each complete one or the number 0. And the number of students requesting feedback was pretty low, which is not great, but it is really good for time management. Lecture hall, oh my God, I can't help you on that one. So they suck. They need to be removed. But I also saw someone mentioning that not all students want to participate in think, pair, share and stuff. And that is something that I'm not sure how much is student cohort, classroom related or what, but I found a lot of disparity in the level of student participation prior to this last go around. I got put in an amazing room where they were sitting at table groups. But before that, my strategy was to use Jamboards, which of course is going away, Google Jamboards. But there's other replacement things, but like an online interface where they were able to anonymously contribute, and using that in my crappy lecture hall style room was game changer in participation. It doesn't make any sense to me why, because I'm an old lady, but it somehow worked.
So I was also going to comment on not having students participate. So I have smaller classes. So my class size is like 30 or less, 30 if I'm lucky, is what I should say. But I do have students that don't want to talk to one another. So I will go and I'll do the think, pair, share with them. But also I have them get up and present things very often in class. So that way by the end of the semester, they're like so used to doing it. And when they do their formal presentation, so there's 2, they each have a specific job. And so that requires, right, the work to kind of be divvied up. So I found that that's very helpful as well.
I'll say something about the archival data for a learning sequence. One of our goals with developing these materials is that you do not have to start from scratch. We have, selected, or the materials developer selected these phenomena, motivating questions, data sources, all of that. It is not live yet. If you go looking on the website for these materials, that you're not going to find them yet, but they will be available by the time we get to this summer, hopefully. But that work, a big part of that work has been done for you in putting that together. It may be that you then say, gosh, I want to do the same thing looking at landslides, but in my area, in my state, rather than in Idaho. So then you have a pathway to find those same data sources, even if it's a few iterations down the road for you. So keep that in mind. That's part of the plan here, is to make these not only relevant for students in many different ways, but relevant and accessible for instructors, and easily adaptable and adoptable. So all of the materials you need will be there, including assessments, rubrics, the kinds of things that Natalie is talking about, how she grades and saves time. All of that will be part of the materials that are available on our website. So we do have just a couple minutes left in the hour, so I'm going to share one more slide here. We do hope to see you at the rendezvous. Feel free, if you have questions about either the workshop or the stipend application, feel free to get in touch with me. And those, I just wanted to remind you about those deadlines. I think Monica has maybe a thing or two to share at the end here, and I will put those links in the chat.
I'm gonna go link battles in the chat.
Okay.
There's the links to the workshop and the rendezvous program are higher up in the chat, but
I'll
putting
do them again.
would be super handy.
Yep.
Thank you again to the speakers for presenting today, and thank you for joining us as well. Just as a reminder, here is the webinar series homepage where you can find all the upcoming and past events. Today's webinar event page is here, and you will be able to find the recording of today's webinar and some handy resources links there. Give us a couple days to post the recordings because we want to make sure we get them captioned. Our next webinar is on April 18th. We hope you can join us for that. It is NAGT sections, opportunities, elections, and events. And then finally, if you could take a few moments to fill out the evaluation for today's webinar, we'd be very appreciative. So thank you again to the presenters as well as to everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you at a future webinar.
Thank you, and please feel free to spread the word to your colleagues about both the webinar, the workshop at the rendezvous, stipend application, all those things. Thanks very much.